Hey, have you ever felt like God was against you? This past week, I had a meeting later in the afternoon, so I had gone home, and I came back. I pulled into the spot that I normally pull into, and then over about 4 or 5 spots was this other car, and it was kind of parked on an angle. The guy had his window down, and so I got out of my car. And I'm just kind of wondering what's happening here. And the guy yells, he said, "Hey man, hey, are you with the church?" And I said, yeah, I am. And so I walked towards his car and we introduced ourselves to each other. And he used to come here, follower of Jesus. But then he said something that I have heard often from other people over the years. I don't know why God is against me. And he said, now let me rephrase that. He said, I don't think God's against me, but I don't know why all of this stuff is happening to me right now in my life. And we went on with this conversation. I got kind of the download from him a little bit, and then I prayed with him and I prayed over him and invited him to come to this church family and be part of this family again. And then he left and went his way. And then I just got to thinking about other conversations that I have had over the last few weeks. You know, conversations with people that are considering taking the next step with Jesus, or conversations with people about where they are in their relationship, maybe with a spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, and they're trying to figure out what the next step is, or people that were just really wrestling with their life-work balance, or all different kinds of questions and concerns that people have. Maybe that you walked into right now. You're just not sure what to do in the present moment. And on top of all of that, add to that the conversations that I have every day with staff and trying to figure out, the best step to take to lead this family to practice the way of Jesus together. And whether we would say it out loud or think it, we all, by the way we live and by the way we make decisions, we're asking 3 questions often. Can I really trust God? Like, does God really have a plan for my life? And is God really for me? Like, is he really for me? Because we say statements like this. Man, I know I should be doing this, but I know I should probably take this step, but I really believe that God is telling me to do this, but. And in every case, what we're saying is, I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure that I can trust God with this next step I take. Just not sure that God really has a plan for my life. And I'm just not convinced that God is for me. So that's one reason why we've been in this series for the past 5 weeks called I Promise, where we're trying to make the case that you can trust God, really, with everything. And that God really does have a plan for your life. And that he's really for you. He's really for you. He's not against you. That's what this whole book, from cover to cover, is conveying to you. It's as if God is putting his job description and resume all in, and he's like, just read it for yourself. Author and pastor John Piper states it this way: in almost every case, God, comes to the covenant partner lays his job description out and says, this is how I will work for you with all my heart and with all my soul and with all my strength, if you will love me as I am, cleave to me, and trust me to keep my word. That is essentially what we began to see all the way back here with the covenant of creation, where God created man and women in his likeness, in his image, sons and daughters, to live in relationship with him, and priestly kings and queens to rule and have dominion, to be fruitful, to multiply, to be his living statues, representatives to the world. God was telling Adam and Eve, listen, you can trust me. I have a plan for you. I'm for you. In fact, I'm laying the whole world in front of you for you to rule and have dominion over. Only, there's just one thing. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You don't want to do that. That's not going to go well for you. But yet their enemy and our enemy put this seed inside of them. I don't know. I'm not really sure if I can trust God here, that he has a plan, that he's for me. And so what did they do? They broke the covenant. They ate of the tree. And the moment that happened, sin entered into the world. The covenant was broken. The world was broken. And they lost both sonship and kingship. And from that moment on, the world began to spiral. Enter Noah. The Bible tells us that every thought of the heart of man was only evil continually. But Noah found favor from God. And we learned that word means grace. Noah found grace. It wasn't about Noah, it was about God and his redemptive plan for mankind. He had a plan. And so he flooded the earth with this catastrophic universal flood, but he kept Noah and his family on the ark. And when the waters receded from the ark, we enter into this Noahic covenant where God again says, hey, listen, I got a plan. You can trust me. I'm for you. Be fruitful and multiply. Same thing he says. We're starting over. You could trust me. In fact, I'm going to put a sign, a big sign in the sky to tell you I'm never going to flood the earth again, the rainbow. And even to this day, when we see a rainbow, it continues to shout, you can trust God. He is the great promise keeper. But then we know the story. The flood did not wash away sin. Because when man multiplied, sin multiplied, and corruption multiplied, and violence multiplied. Still, every intent of the heart of man was evil. So God raised up a man named Abraham. And he made this covenant with Abraham. He said, from your seed, Abraham, will come this promised people, this possession, my precious possession, a people that will represent me. And from your seed, Abraham, there will come nations and kings. And I will bless the world through you and this nation and these people. You will be a blessing. And so what happens? They continue. You find that they begin to break covenant. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. And then Jacob's name is turned to Israel. And Israel has 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. But before that happens, we see them in slavery in Egypt. They had gone to Egypt. They had moved to Egypt. Remember when Joseph was second in command? They moved to Egypt to escape from a famine. But while they were there, they multiplied, and Pharaoh and the people of Egypt started to get nervous because they were multiplying and they were worried that they were going to be subdued by this people. So they forced them into hard labor. And for the next 400 plus years, they were in slavery. Enter Moses. And God, in his redemptive plan, was going to rescue his people from slavery. And so God miraculously rescues them through Moses, brings them out of Egypt into the wilderness to the base of Mount Sinai. And Moses goes up on the top of Mount Sinai as a representative, as this priestly king. Now they're looking to Moses as the leader. And when Moses is up on the mountain, God gives him commandments, and he's like, listen, if you will follow me, if you will give yourself to me, if you will follow my commands, there will be no end to the blessings. And I will bring you into this promised land. All of the promises that I'm going to make to you, they're going to come true. But we see they continue to be covenant breakers. And when we get to the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua, so Joshua succeeded Moses and brought them into the promised land that God had promised. And Joshua's getting to the end of his life. And he says this in Joshua 23:14, now I am about to go the way of all the earth. I'm going to die. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. God, the great promise keeper, he's kept every single promise from the beginning of history to this point. And the people are like, yes, God is awesome. We are all in. He's amazing. We're going to follow him. Our families are going to follow him. He's amazing. But then we read this in Judges chapter 2. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Watch. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, who they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. And as you continue to follow the story in the book of Judges, what would happen is the people would walk away from God, do their own thing. And then God would give them over to their enemies. And then what would happen is they would cry out. So God would raise up a judge, not judge the way we think of judge, like in a courtroom, but like a military leader. So God would raise up this military leader and he would rescue the people. And then they would get comfortable and happy, but then they would walk away from God again. And this cycle would occur like 12 times through the book of Judges, over and over again, until in the end of Judges it reads this: in those days, Israel had no king. And everyone did as they saw fit. Nothing has changed since the beginning. Nothing has changed. And we see in the next chapter of Israel's history, we see not only that everybody was doing whatever the heck they wanted to do, we also see that the priesthood that God set up through the tribe of Levi, the Levites, that was corrupted. And their worship was perverted. And so to say that Israel was a train wreck, both politically and spiritually, would be just an understatement. And so this is the point where in Israel's history, God raises up a prophet. So prophets were messengers of God. They carried the message of God to the people, and sometimes really hard messages. And so the first prophet was Samuel. He's kind of like this transition from judges to prophets. And Samuel walked with God. And one of the things about a prophet was right 100% of the time. And so what happened is the people that they started following Samuel as the leader because he was right. And this got me thinking a little bit. Isn't it interesting that people whose life was a train wreck and they were doing whatever they wanted to do, they saw a dude who was walking out a godly lifestyle. And they saw a guy who was giving godly wisdom. And who were they listening to? Him. So, just put that back here. We are salt and light in this room if you're a follower of Jesus. Wherever you are, as an employer, employee, a student at school, it's just interesting where people go when their life is falling apart. Where we go when our life is falling apart. We call out to wisdom from above. We call out to God. And so Samuel, he was this righteous prophet speaking for God to the people. But we find out that his sons, not so much. His sons, although Samuel was righteous, his sons started walking away from God. And now Samuel's getting old. And so the Israelites are starting to see, okay, we don't like the picture here. So they call a meeting, and we read about this in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4. So the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, hey, bro, you're old. Samuel's like, thanks, appreciate that. And your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us. Watch, such as all the other nations have. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you that they have rejected, but they have rejected me, God said, as their king. As they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day. Bunch of covenant breakers. Forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now, listen to them. But, Samuel, I want you to warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. And so that's what Samuel does. Samuel says to the people, you don't know what you're asking here. You don't want what you think you want. Because I want to tell you what's going to happen. What you want, he's going to come and he's going to take your kids. He's going to take your sons, he's going to put them in military service. He's going to take your daughters, put them as perfumers, bakers, working in the kitchen. He's going to take your fields. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. You don't know what you're asking. But, verse 19, the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said. We want a king over us. Then we'll have a king. We will be like all the other nations with a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles. You kidding me right now? The ultimate betrayal of covenant breakers. What they were saying was, God, I don't trust you. God, I don't think that you have a plan for us. God, I don't think you are for us. So God gives him a king. God gives him a human king. His name was Saul, not Saul in the New Testament. That was Saul whose name was changed to Paul. This is King Saul. Bible says he stood head and shoulders above everybody else. Good looking dude. Man, he just looks like a king. And Saul starts off okay, but then he quickly fades in disobedience. And the second king is King David. Now, that was a lot of setup to get to the Davidic covenant. But while all of these boxes represent different covenants, they are not mutually exclusive from one another. Now, while each covenant adds maybe just something a little bit new, they are interconnected. There's this amazing thread that is walking through these covenants that are shouting that God is intimately involved in history, all of history, from the very beginning. That you can trust him. He's got a plan. He is for you. This all demonstrates that God is for you. And he's moving history forward to where we're going to come next week with the new covenant. It all points to this. But before we get to that, we need to talk about this idea of kingship. Look, the fact that the Israelites wanted a king, that wasn't a bad thing. Like that wasn't their idea. That was God's idea from the very beginning. Remember, sonship and kingship, that we would rule and that we would have dominion. That's why we were created, to represent him. And we see in Abraham that nations and kings will come from him. And then we see with the Mosaic covenant that he acted as this king, this priestly king, and that there would be a kingdom of priests. This is all God's idea. That wasn't the problem. The problem was they wanted a king like all the other godless nations. They were seeking autonomy from God, independence from God, to what they imagined would be a better way. A recurring theme even with us today. You see, the Israelites thought that the answers to all of their problems would be an earthly king. It would be what everybody else in the world had. They thought that the answer to their problem would be to do what everybody else in the world is doing. Does that sound like anybody? How about us? What Israel needed was a king that was God's idea, not theirs. Because they wanted a king that didn't honor God. They wanted a king that wasn't buried in the Torah and leading according to the Torah, the law of God. And they wanted a king that wasn't going to hold them to live according to the law of God or stand in the gap for them. They wanted a king like they imagined, not God's idea. God's idea of a king was someone that would recklessly pursue him, Yahweh, and that would operate under his authority to lead the people. As Gentry and Wellham say in their book, Kingdom Through Covenant, the king would be a devoted servant and son of God and would also function as a priest, instructing the nations in the righteousness of God and inviting them to come under the rule of Yahweh. All of this indicates that the king will accomplish in his person the purpose that God had for the nation of Israel as a whole, to be a kingdom of priests, as Caleb mentioned last week. The king will embody the nation in himself. The people needed and were dependent on a king who was good and righteous. By the way, we need and are dependent upon a king who is good and righteous. Here is where we all get into trouble. We often think that the solution to all of our problems is a king. But our kings look a little bit different than the ancient world. Our kings are control and power and sex and money and our job and the next big thing, the next step on the ladder, getting more, getting bigger and better things. And the problem with that is those kings can never deliver what the King of the universe delivers. But we think they can. We think they can solve our problems, so we serve them. We give ourselves to serve the earthly kings. And maybe they'll solve a problem or two for a little bit. But then they end up taking from us and damaging us. And so that's what Samuel's saying to the Israelites. Like, you don't know what you're asking, but they didn't listen. And by the way, neither do we sometimes. We don't listen, but God in his grace, and the one who never breaks a promise, ever, he kind of intercepts their idea of a king with his idea of a king. And he has Samuel the prophet anoint this no-name shepherd boy named David, who nobody knew. And so before David even assumes kingship over Israel, God had already been working on him. This is so cool to me. Like, he was already working on him as a shepherd, and then as a warrior, and then even on staff in King Saul's court, where he would play an instrument when King Saul got violent to kind of calm him down. Talk about humility. God was forming character in him and bringing him along, and people didn't even know his name. So when we get to 2 Samuel chapter 7, where the Davidic covenant is, David has taken his seat on the throne in his palace, and he realizes, man, I got a killer house right now. But God, he's still in this mobile tent they call a tabernacle. Like, I need to build him a house. And so he tells Nathan is a prophet that succeeded Samuel, and he tells Nathan, hey, I want to build a house for God. And Nathan's like, yes, that's a great idea. But then Nathan gets a word from God, and he's like, actually, I have a different plan. And this is where we find the Davidic covenant. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 8. Now then, and this is God talking to Nathan, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have cut off all your enemies from before you. Now, David, I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth. And I will provide a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did at the beginning and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. You can trust God. He's got a plan, and he is for you. That's what this covenant is saying to David. Not only has God been forming him and preparing him his whole life for this role, now he makes this covenant that has two parts. One is while David is living, and the other is after David dies. The first part is while he's living. He says this, I will make your name great. Notice how different that was than back here. After the flood, and bunch of these guys get together and they're like, we're going to build a tower to God, the Tower of Babel. And we are going to what? We are going to make a name for ourselves. But God reminds David, hey, you know when you were like a shepherd boy? Yeah. I helped you kill the bear and stuff. Remember David and Goliath, that whole story, Goliath, that big giant? Yeah. David, that was me. You are where you are because of me. Because of my grace, my favor on you. He's reminding David, I've been with you all the way. And this should remind us sitting in this room, there are no self-made followers of Jesus. I am who I am. You are who you are by the grace of God. You have what you have. All of your talents, all of your gifts, all of your money, all of your possessions, everything that you have by the grace of God. There are no self-made people here. You do what you do, the skills that you have, by the grace of God. That's who you are. That's who I am. And can I tell you this? He wants more for you than you can possibly imagine. So I'll make your name great. I will provide a place for my people Israel. Remember all the way back here in the Abrahamic covenant, like I'm going to give you a land. And then through the Mosaic covenant, like bringing them into the promised land. Now in the Davidic covenant, in David's reign, the promised land, they're stretching the borders to the ideal parameters of the promised land. But not only is this geographical in nature, now it's permanent. There's a permanence here and a security that God is saying, I'm going to give you security. And then the last part, I will give you rest from all of your enemies. And while David's accolades are pretty well known here, God's reminder is, I will give you rest from your enemies. It's not about David here. It's about God's grace and God's mercy. And all of those, a name, a place, and now rest, those are just a shadow of what is to come. Because the second part of this covenant kicks in verse 11, the second part of verse 11. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood. He's talking about King Solomon. And I will establish his kingdom. He's the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom, key word, forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Here we go. Your house and your kingdom will endure, key word, forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. This part of the covenant's talking about after David dies, and he says, I am going to build you a house. Now, remember, David, he wanted to build God a house. But now God's saying, no, I'm going to build you a house. But there's a play on words in the Hebrew language here where the house that David wanted to build was a temple, but the house that God wants to build for David is a dynasty, a royal lineage. And as we're going to see in a minute, an everlasting dynasty. And he says this, I will raise up an offspring from you to succeed you. God tells David that your son Solomon is going to reign after you. Now that wasn't a given back in those days, but God is telling David that Solomon is going to reign and will be the one who eventually builds the temple for God. And will be like a father. God will be like a father to him. You see the language that started all the way back here? Kingship and sonship. You see it all throughout that. And then you watch. It sounds so similar to Jesus and his disciples, where he says, I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to love you. I'm going to always love you. I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit who's going to walk with you all the days of your life. And then lastly, I will establish your kingdom and throne forever. God communicates to David 3 times the word forever, about his dynasty, about his throne and his kingdom. And when you continue reading the story in the Bible about David and Solomon the king, you see that at first Solomon's awesome. And all the people are like, yes, this is the promise. This is what he was talking about. But then Solomon goes off the rails, leads his people into idolatry and chaos. And then you start to see there are kings that come after Solomon, bad kings and good kings. Israel split in half, and all kinds of corruption happens and idolatry. But when God issued this covenant to David, he wasn't talking about the human kings that would follow. He was talking about the ultimate king. He was talking about the king who would exercise the sonship and kingship that God had intended from the very beginning. The prophet Jeremiah says it this way, the days are coming, Jeremiah 33, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill the good promise I made to the people of Israel and Judah. In those days and at that time, I will make a righteous branch sprout from David's line. He will do what is just and right in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved and Jerusalem will live in safety. This is the name by which he will be called, the Lord, our righteous Savior. The prophet Isaiah adds, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forevermore. The prophets were talking about Jesus, the Messiah. And when you open the New Testament to Matthew, you begin to walk through the genealogy and you see that Jesus, the Messiah, is in the lineage of David, King David. And the Davidic covenant that said your throne will be established forever. That was Jesus. I could go to verse after verse, prophet after prophet, psalm after psalm, and show you God can be trusted. God has a plan. He's had a plan from the beginning. And he's for you. He's not against you. And I can't answer for you. But do you believe you can trust him? I was talking to a guy in between the gatherings, and he was talking about something he knew he had to do, but he hadn't done it yet because he was afraid of the repercussions on the other side. Do you trust God with everything? Every decision you're making, do you trust that you can follow him and he's going to be on the other side of that? Some of you have been on the fence here. You like it here, but you have never given your life to Jesus. You've never trusted, you've never gone all in. So you believe God has a plan for your life? Well, Paul, it just really doesn't feel like it right now. Like, I don't know where he is. This can't be God's plan for my life. Like, what's going on in my life right now, this cannot be God's plan for me right now. Do you believe he's for you today? Like, for you. Some of you have been through some stuff that has rocked your world. Do you believe that God is for you? I can't answer those questions for you. I can answer them for me, and I can tell you, I could trust him. And I do trust him. I trust him with my life. I do believe he has a plan for my life. It's crazy. But I have watched him walk it out. I am walking it out right now. I don't always do it faithfully, but I see it. And I know he's for me. I've been through enough stuff that I can just tell you, I know he's for me. And he's for you. Why don't you trust him?